Okay, to begin, Miss Ross, I wonder if you could tell us when and where you were born and a little bit about your early life.
I was born in Quebec City, the third child in the family. However, two of those children were daughters, and one had died it was a stillbirth, and the other died about 11 months after. And I had a brother who was older than myself. So when I arrived, everybody was glad that this little girl was going to live and stay with them. I had a brother born a couple of years after myself, and then a sister a couple of years after that. So there were four of us, 2 boys and 2 girls. Soon after my birth, we came to Montreal, and we stayed in Montreal until I was in 4th grade.
About when would that have been?
What year would that be? Oh, that would be 1921.
Mm-hmm.
And we stayed in Quebec for about 4 years, and then we came back to Montreal. Mm-hmm. And in Montreal, we had gone to the high school the Montreal High School on University Street, and when we came back, we went to that school too, and we lived up in Lower Creston. Mm-hmm. And that was a very delightful place to live in those days, with the campus in the mountain. And a lot of the school teachers and their families and professors at McGill lived in the area. And of course McGill opened as it does today, it opens its grounds to the children and the adults, and there was always a lot of activities going on, so it was a very pleasant place to live.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you went to school in Montreal?
Yes. And then I graduated from Montreal High, and that was, my brother graduated a year ahead of me, and then I graduated, and then my sister graduated. At that time, both my parents, my father was very ill, my mother wasn't very well. My brother went on to university, but my sister and I, well, the first year I was out of high school, I stayed at home and kept house to help my mother. And then the next year, my sister came out of high school, and we decided we'd try and find jobs. So she went to work for the Provincial School Board as a kindergarten assistant. She played the piano quite well. And by this time, I had been doing a fair amount of volunteer work in settlement houses and on playgrounds. In the summertime, I'd been a play leader. The first time I'd been a play leader, I volunteered as a play leader when I was in high school. And I think I was the first volunteer they ever had. And I had a wonderful experience because I was up in the old Shamrock Market in the north end of Montreal. It was a large community of mainly Italians, a big Italian community up there. And I was working for a little red feather agency called the Montreal Parks and Playgrounds Association. This agency was experimenting and directing and showing the way for the establishment of public recreation, because the cities and towns in Montreal and the metropolitan area did not give that service. And it was really started by a group of women who were very concerned about what happened to children in the summertime, especially in the hot area, in the slum areas of Montreal, really, down beyond the tracks, down near the river. And they had gathered together, and they went down as volunteers in the summertime and played with the children, and they called them sand gardens, because they had sandboxes, and they emphasized that aspect of the play quite a lot. So this was the organization that I sort of became involved in as a volunteer one summer, and I worked up in this great, it was really 3 vacant lots, one ran right after the other, and they closed the streets, and this organization set up swings and sand and seesaws and slides and all kinds of play equipment, horseshoes, and then a little shack. And then the children and the young people would dig their own horseshoe pits and fix up their own sandboxes and make their own diamonds and go to town. And at night time there would be, on the ground like that, there was nothing for there to be 500 people just walking up and down. Sometimes they'd have their dogs and occasionally a goat or a cow in the side. And the woman I worked under, there was a man and a woman on the ground, and the woman worked in the daytime and the man came on at night. And I worked in the daytime usually, except occasionally I might stay. But she was taking sociology at McGill University. And she was fantastic. She was really loved what she was doing, and she had invented all kinds of games for the children to play that required very little equipment. And one was a form of golf that she played with a tennis ball, digging holes in the sand. The children never stopped playing this. It was a fantastic game because there were variations to it. And she was great for sand modeling, and she didn't have a sandbox. She just said, look, I want 6 loads of sand. And we usually put in got the city of Montreal to open up a hydrant or put in a tap or something so there'd be running water. And that sand was kept wet. And it'd be whole towns modeled, but the children would do all kinds of things. It was wonderful. So that was my first year. It was very exciting. I enjoyed it immensely. And they gave me $25 at the end of their summer, which was a lot of money in those days.
Yeah, yeah. Was this during the Depression?
That would be, well, I graduated from high school in 1930. So that would have been about 29, yes, just the beginning of the Depression.
So over the next couple of years then, did you continue to go to school and do volunteer work?
Well, what I decided to do, getting attached with this association, and they started community centers in school buildings. They were promoting the whole idea of using school buildings as recreational centers, because at that time school buildings were locked up and closed at night and nobody used them, these great expensive plants. So there was a whole movement on in the States for this, and Captain Bowie, who was the executive director of the Parks and Playgrounds Association, picked this up and worked very hard. And they turned the Rosemount Public School on Rosemount Boulevard into a center because there were so many unemployed people. And they had a fantastic recreation center going there. And Jean Short, who was with the Family Service Association, took on the job as the director of it. And after my summer on playground, they asked me if I would do some volunteer work. So I said yes. So I went up and coached the basketball team and taught the girls sewing and do things like that. And then they were running all kinds of little courses for people in the recreation field. And these were quite good courses, really. And that was where I was introduced to Jane Addams, because I borrowed some of the books they had and read about Hull Health. And I found this very fascinating. And so that was the way I thought got into social work. And I decided, because Captain Bowie was interested in me and I saw the possibilities of full-time work, that I wouldn't go to, I would continue on with Sir George, because both my sister and I had gone to Sir George before to pick up courses. She went on to McGill, but I decided to stay with Sir George. And the next year, I was appointed director of the Rosemount Community Centre.
So while you were still at Sir George Williams?
Oh yes, because it took me a fair amount of time to get through Sir George, because these jobs were, like I worked every night at the Rosemount Community. I didn't have a car. I lived in Westmount. So I'd be carting equipment and I'd get back at 11 to 12 o'clock.
And you'd get back and forth by streetcar or something?
Yes, by streetcar.
When did you start working full-time at?
Well, I started working full-time, must have been, let's see, I would say 32, 33.
And I think I remember anyway, from our conversation on the phone the other day, that you worked at the Montreal Parks and Rec Association for 10 years. That would have been during the entire time of the Depression then?
Yes, Montreal Parks and Playgrounds, yes, I worked for them up until 1945. when I went to the Montreal Council of Social Agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time, when I left the Montreal Parks and Playgrounds Association, I was the assistant executive director of the agency.
Mm-hmm.
And then they invited, and by this time we were trying to get recreation organized, and we had established within the social welfare field a meeting, a sort of a group that met once a month.
Mm-hmm.
That all worked in the recreation field. And they elected me as chairman of that group, so I was responsible for working with the program committee and developing a program for us and chairing meetings and doing things like that. So I was learning all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the council then had been very small little council, and Gwyneth Howell was appointed executive director about, I think, 1933. And she started to establish the council on the new lines, and she was setting up a group work section, a casework section, a health section. So she asked me if I would come and head up the group work section.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked my sister if she would come. Meanwhile, my sister had graduated from the School of Social Work. She did her field work placement at the Family Service Association. She'd also done some work for the Y, directed their camp. So she came and headed up the casework section. So we both went to work at the council at the same time, so that was very nice.
Yeah.
I remember Gwyneth Howell, when she did this, she said, "Now you're sisters, you know, and sisters can be sisters. How do you get along?" So we said, "We have no trouble." So that was
Thank goodness, huh? Yeah. I wonder if we could go back for just a minute to the time during the Depression and the contact that you had with social programs and social workers and social agencies and that sort of thing. Then what kind of interaction was there?
Well, as director of the Rosemount Community Centre, we had, I really should have looked up, I don't remember, but we had hundreds and hundreds of people coming. And we had a council. All the clubs were represented, like the youth groups would be represented, the sport groups would be represented, the women's clubs, the men's clubs, all the organizations were represented on this council. They were all they made small contributions because we had to pay for the school. So that money came into this council, and then they dispersed by paying part of the cost, and then to buy equipment and to do a variety of things. So we had a very, very active program. We had a women's group, way over 100 women would be attending, and then we had sewing classes and drama groups and choral groups, and a lot of sport, hockey teams and softball teams and badminton. And I remember the young people had a lot of spare time, and they were very versatile, trying to think of things that they could do. We only had one gymnasium, so the badminton club, that meant 4 people could play, and all the rest of the young people were sitting around. But there were a lot of big basements in this school. The lighting was very poor, but there were a lot of big basements, so they decided we had one ping pong table, so they played ping pong. They decided to make to play ping pong on the basement floors. And somebody had given us a whole lot of old badminton nets. So the young men made little stands. They stood about this high, and they drew the courts and chalked them in. We got permission, painted them in. We got permission to the school board to do that, only increasing the size in proportion with the size of the net. And they played ping pong on the spin. That was the fastest game. Oh, it was fast. So we had we had 4 courts. So that was fantastic. They just loved that game.
Yeah.
Really fun.
Were the people that you were dealing with during that period of time
all
people who were
unemployed.
On relief and
all
all that sort of
unemployed,
thing?
yeah.
Was there any contact? Did you have contact with the relief office? And
No,
social
because the
agencies
Family
as well?
Service Association was very active in the area at that time. So we worked very closely together, and child care was there too in Rosemount. So they would ask us for certain kinds of programs. I remember once they asked for a nursery school program, even 2 days or 3 days a week, to give some of the mothers an opportunity to get out. And some of them could do part-time, like housework and things like that, if they could park their babies for a while. So we did that, and the VOA was involved in that, and the child care was involved, and they took responsibility for the health aspects of that. And we got a couple of women who volunteered their time. So we would do things like that. Then they ran health classes for teenage girls because they were concerned about what was happening two young girls that they seemed to have very little knowledge about themselves
Mm-hmm.
and the health aspect. So we would do things like that, and worked very closely with the Family Service Association, and heard some very shocking tales that the women's groups would tell, because conditions were very, very poor.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one situation where the wife was working, she had a job, but the husband didn't have a job, and they had about five children. She became pregnant, and that meant she wouldn't be able to continue with her work. And she tried very hard to abort. And I remember her describing it to the rest of the women, what she did in women's club. I'm laughing at it now because she made a joke of it. You know, she joked about it and laughed about it. But she got a bottle of gin and drank as much of this as she could. And she got on the table and she'd jump on the floor, and she'd get back on the table and she'd jump on the floor and she'd drink more gin. And she managed to abort the baby so she could continue with the job.
Mm-hmm.
So that just gives you some idea. And of course, all the young people didn't have any work at all. We had a big skating rink there, a fantastic skating rink, and they had carnivals and all kinds of things. And we had the use of there was a tennis court that the teachers used in that school, and we had the use of that at night in the summertime. So the young people used to play there. But the thing that touched you very deeply was when war was declared. All these young people who'd been going around together, had nothing to do, all of a sudden, they all got married and the men all went overseas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just, it took this to give them an opportunity to go on with their lives, and yet there was a separation
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of
And
their
then
caring and loving of each other.
as Canada became involved in the war, did your job change during that 6-year period?
I'm just trying to remember when we closed the centre. We closed it in 19... I better check that date, I'm not quite sure. But there was a closing down of activities because, of course, there was employment, and that changed the situation. And there wasn't as much free time or spare time. And I left before it was closed because I went to the council in 35, and there was still a program going on there, but somebody else was taking care of it, and I can't remember when it eventually closed down, but it didn't last too much longer after that.
You went to the Council of Social Agencies in 35 or 45?
In 35.
In 35. Okay.
Did I say that before?
At one point,
No.
I thought you had said 45, but perhaps I didn't. Perhaps I didn't hear you right.
Wait a
That's
minute.
okay. During that time, had you had much to do with social workers per se? You mentioned the Family Service Agency. And
Yes, we
things
had
like
a
that.
lot. I had an old car, so if I was up in the district, I always called in to pick up anybody that wanted to go back downtown and give them a lift.
Mm.
So and then I had some contact, but not that much in relationship to the people that were receiving a service.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't really that much time on your schedule that I had because I worked alone,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have too many. Occasionally we would get some referrals, but not that much. Though the Family Service Association said that they knew all the members that came to the community centre,
Yeah.
and so did child care.
Yeah.
But the Family Service Association workers took a terrible beating in the Depression. They were exhausted. Some of them told me they never really recovered from it. It affected their health.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you were working long hours too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a recollection of what your salary was in those days?
Oh, when we started, that's interesting because, yes, you're right, I started with the Parks and Playgrounds in 1935, I'm sorry. My brother graduated from university in that year. My sister started to work and I started to work. And the basic salary was $85 a month. And my brother got exactly the same. And he went down as a young engineer. There were only 3 engineers that got jobs. And he had his class, so the one job that came in, he got it. The other two, where they went back to jobs, one went back to CNR, because he was on a CNR scholarship, and the other, his father had a business, and he went back into the business. And Opie was with All Ken Company. And we all got the same salary.
Mm-hmm.
So I was amused because my sister had graduated and my brother had graduated. we were all starting at the same salary.
At the same salary, okay. Moving along then to when you started at the Montreal Council of Social Agencies, could you explain a little bit of what that organization was, what it was trying to do, and how it ran on things?
Well, councils of social agencies were new in Canada. I'm not sure whether we were one of the first councils in Montreal or not. I think probably we were. Our function was to serve the English-speaking people. We didn't serve the total community. And our function was to work to develop better services for people in all aspects of their living. So it involved health and what we call casework. The needs of people in that aspect of the casework agency type of service, and in the field of leisure and recreation.
Mm-hmm.
And we also hope to do research. We didn't have a grant for it when we started, but we did individual research projects that we would want to work on, and we would do our own studies or employ somebody to do the job for us.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the interesting things that came out of that, for instance, in 1955-56, the council did a study on old age, the needs of the elderly people in the area, because it was similar to what we have today. And then the three sections took responsibility for implementing the recommendations that came out of this study.
Mm-hmm.
And mine was, of course, to look at the social life and the recreational life of older people. And this was a revelation to me because I hadn't really worked with older people before. But the Montreal Council Association had fantastic volunteers. They just seemed to come in out of the United Funding, like all the wives and some of the men would come in. And they were anxious to learn, anxious to take training programs. We used to run all sorts of training programs for volunteers of various kinds, including board members. They were just thirsty for this. And we had some that were really anxious to move the community ahead, to move our old institutions, because we had quite a few institutions for older people. They had really been developed by wealthy people in Montreal to be a place for their staff to go when they were elderly. So if you go back into the history of all these, like St. Margaret's Home, Griffith-McConnell to some extent, that's a little newer, other homes of this kind, you find that the board members were, you know, the staff, the people who want to place their staff. So they had no idea about the needs of people. Mm-hmm. Either, like in Protestant homes, they separated husbands and wives. Mm-hmm. In there. Mm-hmm. And they ate in a dining room in the kitchen, in the basement. They used to like to come up and sit in the hallway because then they could see people coming and going, but they wouldn't let them come and sit in the hallway. Mm. It was really shocking. And when we discovered this, we started to look at the other agencies. We had some very good volunteers who wanted to make these changes. And they were starting then, as soon as the director of that residence would retire, they'd look for somebody else that was more progressive and put them in. Mm-hmm. And so my job, one of the jobs was to interpret to the community through leisure the gifts and skills and the capabilities of older people. And we sat down as a group to think, well, how can we do this? And we thought, why don't we have a hobby show? Why don't we have a hobby show? So we thought that's it. Well, we have to have it right in the center of town. And Betty Bovey, whose husband was worked for the Sun Life Insurance Company, said, look, we can get the big auditorium in the old Sun Life building, Sun Life Insurance Company, which was it was on St. Catherine Street. They have a great big auditorium, they'll give it to us. Everybody coming out of the offices will go. So we alerted all the groups around, because by this time we had been also working with our community centres, settlement houses, the YMCAs, our public recreation departments, encouraging them to give services to older people because they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
There was no service in our public recreation for older people. So the Rotary Club said they'd finance it, so they had $5,000 and they would work as volunteers. So we ran this hobby show. It was just unbelievable, the stuff that came in. The whole auditorium was packed with exhibition booths.
Mm-hmm.
They came from everywhere. And all these volunteers that we had gathered and had been went down, for instance, the Protestant Orphan Home, they want to bring the older people up to see. And the man who was the director said, you can't do that. If anything happens to these older people, you're responsible for them. She said, I don't care. I'm going to bring them up. I'm going to get my friends to bring down 5 cars and we'll take them in and we'll bring them. He said, you remember, you're responsible. And he shook his finger at this very, very sweet, very, very lovely woman. And so she brought them all down, men and women, and they had a fantastic day, but she just kept her eyes on all the time. She was afraid something would happen to them. They loved, it was an exceptionally fine, I have some pictures of it, I must get them out. But the men wanted to go to the washroom. So she went with them and she stood outside the door and they went in. They didn't come out, they didn't come out, and they didn't come out. She started to get more, she said, what's happened to them? So eventually some men started to come out and she said, did you see 3 elderly men in the washroom? They said, no, there's no elderly men there. She said, there's no. She couldn't figure out. Then she started to ask other people and she discovered there was another door. They got out the other door, they were waiting for her in the other hall. They got confused. So she picked them up and she took them back home safe and sound. But that was a kind of struggle that we had to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But we held this hobby show the second year because it did exactly what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And the work and the material, and some of the clubs put on skits. Also, with hundreds of people came to see it.
Mm-hmm.
We had fantastic publicity in the newspapers.
Mm-hmm. When did the Council of Social Agencies have any kind of role in trying to help the United Way, or the Red Feather, as I guess it was called then, helping the Red Feather raise and allocate its money?
No, it didn't help them raise it, but a lot of the volunteers would be involved in both sides of the program.
Uh-huh.
Because the volunteers did a big job of raising that money.
Uh-huh.
There was the Red Feather, as we called it then, was Charlie Young was in charge of that. And he also was the director of the Montreal Council of Social Agencies. And Miss Howell worked under him. It was a kind of a token, because he didn't really have much responsibility except to make sure that things went well in the council. Because the council was composed of not just the Red Feather agencies, but of the Jewish Federation, English-speaking Catholic Federation, and other groups in the community that were interested in the welfare picture.
Mm-hmm. Did you have your own board of directors?
Yes, separate board of directors, and we had our separate sections. Each section had its own executive committee and its own membership, and they were divided. And we worked very closely with each other. For instance, now working on this, in implementing this report of the needs of the elderly, we worked very closely together. We checked and confirmed. But as a result of this, I might just mention it before we go on to branch out a little bit. The Quebec government was starting to move into the whole field of public services, because they didn't have a public welfare department in Quebec. So they were starting to move into this, and they were very interested in what we were doing as a council. And I know that I was instrumental in some ways in creating a fairly good relationship with the department in Quebec, because we didn't have a department, the provincial government didn't have a department of education, we didn't have a department of leisure, and the department of welfare was, if it was it was a very, very minor thing. So with the new changes in government, they started to look at this, and the government invited the Director of Public Recreation for the City of Montreal to head up a commission to study how they should develop a department within Quebec on the provincial government level. And Rennie Belil was an old friend of mine. He'd come to our training programs that we'd held at the Parks and Playgrounds Association. And he asked me if I would sit on the committee. And I said yes. So I was the only English-speaking person that sat on that committee. And we operated, it took us about a year and a half, I guess. We published our report. And then we implemented it, and we got an excellent man appointed. We selected him, and they took whom we selected. He was a graduate of Laval School of Social Work, specializing in social group work. So we thought we were doing very well at that time, you know. But it didn't last very long, because we were moving into the time when there was changes in government almost every year for about 3 or 4 years.
After 1959?
This would be in the hobby show was. I should really got to check my dates. The hobby show was. It was 55 and 56, the hobby show. Those were the 2 years. This would be, isn't it awful? I've forgotten the date. It's because, can I just sort of move a little bit to the side so I get, because I left the Montreal Council of Social Agencies. We were invited to move our section out and form an association of leisure time services. And we did that in 68, yes. No, we did that before that. We must have done that in, isn't it funny how time disappears on you, eh? I'm sorry, I really should have checked that.
Oh, that's okay.
I have a poor memory for dates anyhow. I'm trying to attach, yes, I'm sorry.
I was thinking that you mentioned that there were changes in government quite consistently after the death of Duplessis, right?
Yes.
It was when
yes,
a number of changes.
Yes, we had, and I should have looked up the names of the premiers that came in.
I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yes.
In any event, I guess
the names have really, they've just gone, and I'm going to have to get them back.
No. Well, the important thing for us, though, I guess, is the development and the change in interest in the government in social welfare.
Yes. Well, in this was just recreation. What we were appointing was a department of leisure time.
Right.
That's what we were trying to establish, a department of leisure time within and we established that. And then the core of it stayed all through until the Parti Québécois came in. And then they threw everything out. So we worked very hard to get that. And this one man came in, and he wasn't much of a politician, but he was a very good person. But when that government moved out, they moved him over from that department into a youth department because he was a social worker. They took him out of the recreation field, and they appointed somebody else to come in and do the recreation field. And that was, I think that was a Doucette. And when he came in, he was a very bright young man who had been working for the National Film Board. That would be the French section. And he picked up the English community right away because he saw that we had a fantastic program in the leisure time. We set up agencies. Like we worked with the health section. We did a study on needs of the handicapped. We established an organization for the recreation for the handicapped. We got its charter, we got it organized, we got staff for it, we set it up. So we would be doing things like this, you know, through our process. And when he came in, he saw all the things that we had. We had a Golden Age Association. All our organizations now had Golden Age programs that were fantastic. The Jewish people they put up a building, you know. They were really into it, all kinds of, and volunteers were excited about this. They brought all the elderly people out of the homes, out of the back rooms, you know. So this was happening, you know, right across. All the public recreation departments now were all setting up. Rennie Bellil said, yes, Sybil, we should have done this long ago. So he sets up programs for older people. They heat a swimming pool so it will be warm so older people can go and swim in it. So that all the community centres were now having programs for elderly people. We're opening up their facilities. All the public recreation departments right in the whole metropolitan area. Because at that time I had organized, I'm jumping around, but I don't know how else you can do it, you know. Because that's the way it just went. Just like caught on like wildfire. Once we got the hobby show kind of alerted everybody. And the public recreation departments, I had brought them together because we had been, when I was at Parks and Playgrounds, we ran playground training courses for play leaders in the summertime. So all the directors of public recreation in the metropolitan area, there'd be 25, 30, 32 directors, came together under our support and set up these training programs. And I remember I wanted to back out because they said, no, because if you back out, we're going to start quarreling. And you're the only woman here, so you just better stay. It was one time when women were like, because you're not a man. If you were a man, they wouldn't let you be chairman of this group. But you're a woman, so that's fine. Because all the public recreation directors were males. I think they were just, you know, looking for somebody to do the work. So anyhow, we did it. We had nice courses, but it gave me a contact with this, and we used to run special projects also to try to get them to start talking to each other and get them to plan together. And we did 2 or 3 very nice things around that. And we got the French community involved in this too, because of course playgrounds were artists, so we started to get a very large group of the French playgrounds in. But as a result of this, these directors of public recreation were very close to the council. So when we started to work with the elderly, we just sent the word out to them. So they all started to get money from their city councils for programs for the older people, and they started to set up all kinds of programs. So the thing mushroomed. It was fantastic how quickly it grew, because we had grassroots. You know, we established these grassroots, and we certainly, like on the committee that I would have, we would have representation from the public recreation section, and we met on a monthly basis, and then our section was represented on the board. So it was well structured. So our programs for the aged really took far. And when the French community came in, then when Giuseppe came in, he bought this, he loved this. And he got to know the Jewish people and what they were doing. And then he brought in, from across the province, to meetings that he asked us if we would hold. All the people were struggling, the French people throughout the province were struggling to try to get little programs going for the older people. And he brought them in, and we must have had 4 or 5 meetings. And then they were invited to go and see what the other centres were doing, what the Jewish people were doing, what the city of Montreal was doing, what our recreation centres and community centres were doing. And this resulted in the establishment of what we call Golden Age Councils across the province. Because by this time they divided the province up into various regions, and they were organising their leisure time programs in relationship to these regions.
Mhm.
So they were setting up a central core for Golden Age, and then they were branching out into whatever resources they could use the way we had done.
Mhm.
So this was fascinating.
Mhm.
And then they held a conference in Montmorency Falls to get, they brought in people from all over the province for that conference. And we went down, the Jewish people were there, and so it was a sharing. And the same with our recreation. But what happened to a lot of our programs is this went on, our programs got watered down because our council started to have a bad time and our United Funding started to have a bad time.
The relationship between a council and a United Fund is something that's always interested me, I guess because of my own experience with social planning organizations. And you mentioned that when you began at the council, that there was a close relationship, and that was during the Depression, and I suppose money wasn't too plentiful. You worked at that agency though for a fairly long period of time, didn't you?
Montreal Council Social Agencies, yes.
So, what happened? How did things change over the years that you were there?
Well, the tragedy of the Montreal Council of Social Agencies and also the French Council, because we worked very closely with them. And if we, like, when we were going to go into the ages, we phoned Frances Marshall and said, look, we've done this study, we have these recommendations, we're going to go. Do you want to go with us? She said, no, we can't go with you because we're not ready and we can't do that. Sometimes we phone and say, look, she said, yes, we're ready, we'll go with you. Mm-hmm. So it was a very nice relationship. And there was a real recognition that we were never going to be united, as one council. We couldn't function that way in Montreal because there was too wide a gap in the kinds of needs that the two communities had.
How did the needs differ?
Well, the English people had really been servicing their community for a long, long time in the public field. The church had done it in the Catholic field. And then, of course, the churches couldn't recruit nuns or priests anymore. So they lost their personnel. So that affected their services, and then they had to start to rebuild it up again. So their needs, they were at a far different level than we were, and that the Jewish community was. They were way ahead. The Jewish community is way ahead of everybody, I suppose, everywhere in Canada. But in Montreal, their services were just tops. And they had trained staff, and they had the whole works. And then probably we came next, then the English-speaking Catholics came next, and then the French came down the line. But they had to start setting up agencies for themselves because the church couldn't handle their welfare anymore.
Whereas in the English community that had happened long
ago. We agreed. And it was part of the culture of the English community anyhow. It came out of Hull House and the Webs and that type of thing to develop community centres, to develop services, to develop houses, to look after the needy.
Yeah. So.
But it was done through the church to a great extent in the French community than it was in the English community. Churches did participate, but not in the same way. We had a couple of little houses like Tyndale House, which was run by United Church. But it was very small program.
So when you started then with the Montreal Council of Social Agencies, there were the other councils and relationships amongst the councils were positive and productive, but you were more advanced in the provision of service just because of your history. What happened over the next 20 years or so that led those things to change?
Well, it was the political picture. It was very unstable. Our council was having a bad time too. Gwyneth Hull took very sick and retired and died. And that was nobody left to take it. None of us would take the job because it was a terrible job. And the connection with the Federation was very, very difficult because you were battling that all the time. Not having complete authority. They tried to look for somebody, and they hired George Hart. And I think we just let that pass. George Hart's main interest was to learn French and to get the United Fund together, because that's what they were working on, the United Fund. So he spent all his time learning French and working with the United Fund. And at that time, I was completely into the French community. We had, because through the French community now was starting to develop services for itself. And they were setting up structures across Quebec. They picked up a grassroots organization that they had in Quebec City that did recreation. And they were trying to expand this to make it into a provincial-wide organization. And Rennie Belil, who was the director of public recreation for the city of Montreal and who had chaired the committee that had did the report for the establishment of a provincial recreation department, was president of this organization. And he spoke to myself, the chairman of my section, and said, look, why don't we all get together and why don't we see if we can't really establish a good provincial body? And he said, why don't we take the sort of the roots of our French organization and the roots of the group work and recreation section and form that into what could be a provincial body that would serve both English and French. So we went, they held a great big conference in Montreal and they invited us to come. So representatives from all my section went. There must have been roughly, I'd say 30 people went, representing about 30 of our agencies. And it was a well-organized conference because the man that was headed up this is one thing he organized very well. There was a lot of glamour to it and it was a showpiece, but it also had, there was meat in it too. And they invited us. We had a workshop, we had an English workshop in it, and in this workshop they decided that we would like to become a part of this association. And they invited, we presented a report from our group, from our work group, and they passed the motion that they would like to have us. So then we took this back to the council, and we took it into the board, and the board said fine. So we moved the section out. And we were there, and what was happening, the government was funding all these organizations, so we would get our grant.
Mm-hmm. And from my experience with United Way, United Funds, the fact that an entire section of types of agencies found another kind of funding would have been very beneficial for United Funds.
Mm-hmm.
Really glad to see you.
Oh, good. Charlie was glad to see us go. If Bridget Howell had been there, she would have tightened it, you know. But anyhow, they helped finances too. They made donations for the first 2 years, I think, of our operation. So they contributed something. Oh no, what we did? Yes, what we did, we got all the federations. We got the YMCA, the Red Feather, the YMIWHA. No, yes, YMIWHA. And the Federation of Catholic Charities all made contributions plus the government. So it was a nice funding. It was well funded. Mm-hmm. And so we got off to a fairly good start. But then after that the government started to change. You know, they would. And then they set, see, once they did this, now they set up councils right across Quebec. There were all these councils set up. We had an English one in Montreal to serve the Montreal people and to be kind of a voice for the needs of English people at other places if they, you know, if they want to call us in. But there was also a French one in Quebec, which was the CLQ, which was the organization that ran this conference. And we were sort of like close. We rubbed shoulders very nicely. We worked well together because Rennie Belil was the president of this organization. And then they started to establish them right across the province. All these regions were starting to establish councils, and they hired young men, and they set them up, and they gave them half their first grant. And then the snap election was called, and Sybil, the government came in. So here all these young men who had moved out, some of them had even bought houses. There was no money. So it was rough. So there was all kinds of things going on. But anyhow, they got it together. And the government eventually came through, so they got the grant again. It was a, you know, it was a, well, the French make a big global plan, you know, but the foundation underneath is shaky.
Mm-hmm.
But the dream was a nice dream.
Mm-hmm.
So this went on, and for about 3 years, and sometimes it was good, and sometimes it wasn't so good. But we did some very nice projects ourselves. We did a very nice piece of work. But we did a fantastic piece of work out in Park Extension, where we did an experimental program of recreation for children, especially small children, on a block basis. And we had about 5 of the major organizations working with us. And that was a community where there were flats of houses, and they had chicken wire all across the verandas in the back, those long verandas that run on these houses. They had chicken wire because the children had to play up there, the little toddlers, 2 and 3 year olds would play there all summer. So we ran programs down in the yard, so that those children would come down, they would be supervised, and we had put in play leaders there. The ladies all had bicycles, carried their stuff around in their bags. It's a fantastic program. We had a very good woman who supervised it, and then we had all the agencies backing it 100%. Mm-hmm. So it was nice. Mm-hmm. They all helped to fund it. And then we did a program in the NDG community, because by this time the government was starting to get organized in relationship to its welfare services, and it was setting up its social service councils across the province. And NDG, as a big English-speaking pocket, wanted to be prepared for this. And when I had been with the Parks and Playgrounds Association, we had done some experimenting with community councils. And we had one going in NDG, and it had been quite successful. But like all organizations of that type, there has to be some kind of staff, or some organization and that community has staff that can give it support. Otherwise, it's an impossible struggle to keep going just with volunteers. But they came and asked us, the Association of Leisure Time Services, if we would give them professional staff help to get themselves organized so they could set up one of these councils. So we said yes, we would. So we went in with a team and got the community organized, and we must have had a group of about 50 or 60 around the table. And it was hard work, but we succeeded. We brought down all the ministers from the provincial government, all the ministers that represented this community, and the federal government was there, and we set up a whole series of workshops, and published a very excellent report, and got a group together that carried on, and because of our interpretation to the people who had some power in government, they got grants, and they got money eventually, and they set up their council, and they still have this NDG community council going. So we were very proud of that. Mm-hmm. They were too. They gave us credit for that, and we were pleased with it.
So you were with the Association of Leisure Time Services for again another long period of time, was it?
That would be we closed in 1968. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was that we couldn't get any more funding. The councils of social agencies were having a bad time. They both disappeared, you see. The Montreal Council of Social Agencies and the French Council both disappeared.
That was sometime after, though. Sometime after 68, wasn't it?
No, because when we were leaving, oh yes, they amalgamated. That's what they did. The two of them amalgamated. You know. They amalgamated in 68. Mm-hmm. And then they really dispersed because I remember by that time I was working for the Ville-Marie Social Service Centre.
Mm-hmm.
I went in there to work as a consultant in the field of the aged.
Mm-hmm.
I did a study for them. And at that point I heard through the grapevine that the Joint Council was really had disbanded, but that all the files, the Montreal Council of Social Agencies files, and were in the office space, but that there was a young group of quote Turks in there running the show, and that the man that owned the building was concerned because they were taking out desks, they were taking out typewriters, they were taking out all kinds of things. And that man was responsible for the building we were in, where I was working. And inadvertently, I heard him talking to somebody else in the hallway, and I went up. And he said yes. He said, if you have any interest in there, he said, you better get your things out. So I said, well, can I go down and look and see what? He said, yes, sure, you come on down. I'll take. So he took me down to the building, and all our banks of files were there. We had put together, because Phoebe Pratt, who had been a volunteer, fantastic volunteer with us for years and years and years. She was a graduate of the Boston School of Libraries. She was a librarian. She set up all our system for us, our libraries, all our filing. She set up the McGill School of Social Work, all their filing system for them. All our annual reports were all bound, beautifully bound. And into that went every report that we had published.
Mm-hmm.
Just before I got down, I got down that afternoon in the morning, some little gal had put them all in a big bag and put them out in the garbage, and they'd gone.
Mm.
All our records back to 1928.
Mm. You mentioned that the councils were having troubles. What kind of troubles were they having?
Well, you see, they had poor staff.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible staff. Terrible staff. They're like these young Turks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just, they didn't care, they didn't know. You see, at that time, they were activists in the field of social work, and that's what we had there. They were out leading marches of poverty people through the place, and they were doing all this type of thing. We had two of them in the council. They had been hired by George Hart. And you know, they were young and they didn't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have a clue what they were doing. Didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
One went back home because he didn't want to be that type of person. He was getting no supervision. He wasn't getting anything. So no, our council took a real beating. But I got down in time to find all the banks of our files there.
Mm-hmm.
So I called all our past presidents, Peggy Hugeson, Judge Hugeson's wife, and Betty Bove, and Gwen Hadley's secretary, and myself, and Doris Powell, and whoever I could get. And we went down and we started to look at the files just to see if they were all there.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, they were. But then this man that owned the building said he was going to put a padlock on it, and nobody could touch anything. But what we had done, we had just taken tape anyhow. We tied all the, but there was a bank of files almost that led to this room, you know. And so then I heard they were moving all the stuff out. I said, well, where are they moving it? Well, they're moving it up to Centre Aid. Well, I don't have much faith in Centre Aid. It's a past experience. And I called the man up there and said, now look, don't touch it. He said, well, we want the filing cabinets. We've taken them all out and we put them in cardboard boxes. And he said, well, I said, we can't work in cardboard boxes. He said, well, that's what we do. That's what we've done. But then, you know, they're not yours. I said, those filing cabinets, oh, we need them, he said. Oh, you know, that's an English community. Mm. So he said, I'll send them up. He's, you know, this room filled with these cardboard boxes, one pile on top of the other. They came in and, at least I thought I'm going to hold them. And this nice man who owned the building said it was an old nunnery. So they had these great big basements. He said, look, I'll give you this. It's a dusty room, he said, but it'll be safe, and we lock the door, and even if there's a fire, they won't be burnt, he said, because it's all the water restricted. So he did that. But I just looked at it and I said, you know, we can't do anything about that. So I called Phoebe Pratt and told her what had happened. And she said, I'll come down and look. So she came down and looked. She said, Sybil, that's impossible. So she said, I'll just see what I can do and I'll call you back. So apparently she called Mrs. Hughes and a few of our other past presidents and volunteers, and they called McGill, and Phoebe called the archives at McGill and asked them if they would take them. And they said, we'll give you $500 to pay for students in the summertime to clean them up. So they said yes. So they came down and got them all in the big truck and took them all and put them in here. So that's one thing I'm very proud of, that I was able to save those files. Because that's the history of social welfare in Quebec.
Yeah,
really in Canada.
Yeah, it is. Maybe that'd be a good place to stop. Okay, Ms. Ross, when we left off, we were talking again about the Montreal Council of Social Agencies, and I've neglected to ask you about your formal social work education. When was it that you started taking classes in social work? And
Well, I picked up a couple of courses when I was at the council, at the New York School of Social Work. I took 2 courses, the summer courses that they used to give at Camp Edie Mason. I took a group work course. I guess it was group work 1. And I'm not quite sure what the other course was. But when I came to the Council of Social Agencies, it was on the understanding that I would have time off to go and get my master's. So they were very generous about that. However, we ran into trouble. We had sickness at home and I couldn't go, and then we had sickness in the office. Campaign assistant man dropped dead of a heart attack. And then the man that was going to replace me when I was gone had to take that job. So there were things, but I eventually got off, and I did it in two pieces. I went to Boston, and I went for a summer. I did what they called 1 year, but it wasn't quite 1 year. And then I came back and worked the next winter. And then and the next summer, and then I took the next year off. Well, the winter season, like I took from, I went down in time to start the classes in September, and I came back about June.
Why was it that you decided to go to Boston?
Well, one, because they would let you do it this way. That was one of the major reasons. The other was we had invited Saul Bernstein to come up and speak to us. We were always running seminars or things of that kind, and we asked him to come up and speak to us or give us leadership in a seminar. And we sort of liked what we saw, and I liked him. And I liked Boston. It was very much like Montreal. And that's why I decided to go. I had seriously thought of going to New York School because I'd taken 2 courses there, and I enjoyed that. But I think too I decided because I had a very good friend in Connecticut. And in the summertime, my weekends I spent with her, which got me out of the hot heat of Boston summers, which were terrible. And I was sharing an apartment downtown, and it was very, very hot. I remember sitting with the electric fan going, a little pair of tights and a towel, trying to study. And the moisture was just dripping off. In the classroom, when we stood up, all the girls that stood up, they left a circle of water. The water just ran right down your back.
Yeah.
Because Boston can be even, and where the school is, there's no wind. Very, very hot area.
Yeah.
Humid, very humid.
Did you do field placements?
Yes, I did. I did Children's Aid. No, Children's Service Center. No. Let me see now. Children's Service Center is the one we have. I think it was Children's Aid.
In Boston?
Yes, right in Boston. And they were having groups for children who had problems. And I had a little girl, 5 or 6, who was finding it hard to identify with the females. And I can see her point because the boys in the family had one little girl, and she saw her mother having a baby every year, I guess. And so that was a nice experience. And it was very, very pleasant. And the children were absolutely delightful. It was her friend was a little boy. And they lived down in the slums. The living conditions were just ghastly. And all the people in these flats all shared one toilet downstairs. And this little boy, his father was a baker. And he loved to gamble. So they never had enough money because he was always hoping he would win. And when he would come home, he would send the little boy off to the neighbors for a cup of coffee. And the little boy would take a terrible time because the neighbors would say no to him. But if he came home without it, he got a terrible licking. So he would stay until he got it. He was absolutely a charming, charming child. His insides were so beautiful. What his dreams, what he saw, what he thought. When he did any paintings, they were just filled with color and music. I remember the last day we took them all on a trip, and they all came with their best clothes, all dressed up. So it got hot because we went to a fairground and we went to a few other places. So the necktie came off, the coat came off, the shirt got opened, and he got stuffed in his pockets. So when the director of the children's aid came with me, and we had a big station wagon, it was her station wagon, and she drove it. So when they were getting out, I was just checking his child, make sure they had everything that they started with. So I was checking with him because I knew if he didn't have his clothes, he would be in trouble. So couldn't find his necktie. I said, "What did you do with it?" I went through all these parts, couldn't find his necktie. He's standing like this, saying, "I don't know, this little thing. I don't know." I said, "Come on, what did you do with it? It must be somewhere. You didn't drop it. Now I warned you not to." Then all of a sudden he went like this, and the necktie was in his hand, rolled up in a little ball, and he went into fits of laughter. He played the trick on me. Oh, I just, he just broke your heart and you laughed. It was so delightful and charming. But how, at that time, a child like living in those conditions, it could be so, had that lovely gleam inside. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
You
went to.
He played the crocodile. We did drama. I just finished. We dramatized stories, and we did kidnap. And we used to meet in a church hall, and we sat up on the stage because it was small. And so when he decided he wanted to be the crocodile, I said, "All right." And we talked about it. And then he ran right across to the other corner of the hall. And I said, "What are you going there for?" Because "I'm going to come in. I'm going to come in," he said. I said, "Fine." So we started to play. He crawled like a crocodile the whole way down that floor. He went through grimaces. He just put on a knack. The kids were in fits of laughter. He was really, he's original. Powerful. No, I don't want to bore you with that, but he was a delightful
Sounds like
child.
he might have grown up to be Danny Thomas or something.
Yes, right.
You went to the School of Social Work in Boston after having had some years of experience in social kinds of occupations.
Yes.
How did your professional education affect your work when you came back? Did you do things differently?
Well, I had more insight into what I was doing, which was one of the aims of life, isn't it? You would get to know yourself better and to use yourself better. So I did that. I had more confidence in myself, of course. I think those would be the two main points. I was interested because I found when I did community organization, I didn't get, when I went there, I took group work courses, I took community organization courses, and I took casework courses. So I took all the senior courses. There were 3 of us that did that. We were taking group work. And Alice Hyde was teaching at the time, and she was fantastic because she would get us to use the group and analyze it as we would analyze a person. She was really wonderful. And she just had the 3 of us. She used to have lunch with us once a week, just to help us. And I think she was interested too what we were doing, because the other 2, especially this young man that was in the group, he went on to one of the clinics to really to really work with children who were in trouble. So he was interested in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when I really started to do community organization after taking my course and I had all the theory and everything, and as I look back at my life, I say, well, where I really learned about community organization was at the parks and playgrounds. That I'd be doing things and I said, well, that's what I always did, except now I knew why I was doing it. Before I just automatically did it, because I thought that was the right thing to do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But now I had the theory behind me too.
Right.
But I didn't learn anything except to know that I was, doing it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Tied it in with that, I'd like to ask you about your affiliation or connection with the Professional Association over the years, Canadian Association of Social Workers, or later the Quebec counterpart. Were you at all involved with either?
Yes, I was. I was on the executive committee and I was vice president, and was going to go on to be president, but I went to Boston instead.
You were vice president of the Quebec Corporation?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What kinds of issues was the association dealing with at the time? Do you have any recollection of that?
It was just an English section then, we weren't involved with, it wasn't French, it was just English.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it was a branch, so we were just an English organization. Now the French were talking about setting up their own. My sister got involved in that, I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I guess when I got back, she probably was involved in it. By that, when I came back, I didn't really have time because I had to catch up. And then I had a couple of bad times too. I had pneumonia, had Asiatic flu. I had that awful Asiatic flu in 1954. So my job was about all I could carry then.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't the French English. It was just the English organization.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what we were doing at that time. Must have been very impressive, eh? I don't remember.
I found that for people who go to a lot of meetings during the course of their work, it's sometimes hard to distinguish between the work meetings and the professional association meetings and the community meetings and the volunteer meetings.
Mm-hmm. But we were working, well, one of the things we were struggling with, of course, was standards and programming to meet our needs, and this would be the two things we would work. But I'm trying to think of committees. Which committees we had? And then we were struggling with the question too of the French English aspect of it. That was coming into it.
How did that...
Frances Marchand, now Frances Marchand was a member of that.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure she was, positive. But you see, there were a lot of people like Frances who were anglicized to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
What school did Frances go to? Did she go to McGill?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Oh, you didn't interview Frances, did you?
No, not yet.
No,
Next
you
week.
couldn't yet. I'm pretty sure she was a member.
Mm-hmm. How did the profession deal
But then
with
after
the
that, you see, I didn't get that close to, when I came back, I really wasn't very active in the CASW because I was so active in all these other things.
in the leisure...
The leisure time field, and the professional organizations in the leisure time field.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was appointed to the National Committee on Recreation and Sports. And I was on that for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard work. And then they sent me to Austria, to a conference on playgrounds from all over the world. And that was fascinating. That was really fascinating. So then I took a trip across Europe, went to Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
I spent some extra time in Vienna because it's so beautiful.
Mm.
Bought myself a hat, bought myself a cape. I'll show them to you afterwards.
Yeah.
You know the melton cloth?
Yeah.
And one of the hats that everybody wears on the ski slopes, those beautiful, beautiful hats. People I still wear it. I was at the maple sugar party that we have here to raise funds for the Missisquoi Museum. And it was a windy, cold day, and I had my hat. Was I wearing the cape? I can't remember. I had my hat anyhow, and there were hundreds of people there. But this woman came up to me that I didn't know, and she said, "My husband wants to know where did you get your hat?
Mhm.
So I kind of thought, you know, what have I got my hat? So I said, oh. Because I didn't expect it, you know, in the country. I said, I got it in Austria. She said, he's right, that's what he said, you bought it in Austria. I said, my husband travels a lot, and he has one like it. But she said, I can't convince him to bring me one.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
So that was very nice.
Yeah.
So I was doing those kinds of things, and then you see, I was on the Rennie Belil study.
Mhm.
So I traveled all over the province, and that was exhausting. That was
Mhm.
really exhausting.
I'm sure.
Because we had a terrible time. And Rennie had a heart attack, and then in the end, all this group of young men decided they didn't like the way the report was going, and they didn't want it done that way, and they started to attack him. And he got up and walked out. I think he was in trouble. He got up and walked out. So everybody just kept quiet. So then I said my little piece, so they quietened down, they stopped. You know the way.
What did you say?
Well, I said, as I recall, in a very quiet little voice, and I spoke in English because I was wanting to be very careful what I was saying. And I said we had been appointed by the government to do this job. We had all worked very hard at it. Because what their arguments weren't making any sense.
Mhm.
You know, they wanted to tear the whole thing up and start all over again.
Mhm.
And they were really off on they were like part of this Young Turk group, you know, they were off on something that was so unrealistic. It didn't, so I just talked very gently like that, and I said, for us to move and make these changes at this point was unrealistic, because we were not at that point. Perhaps we could do these things 10 years from now, but right now we had to do some of the basic things.
Mhm.
And that's what we were trying to get into this report, some of these basic things.
Mhm.
And I said, it's fine to have dreams, that's good, but right now we better just stay with reality. And you know just as well as I know that Rennie is not well, and he's undertaken this task, and he's trying to do it to the best of his ability and help us all to work. And I said, this kind of behavior is just, I find it very destructive. I don't understand it. It wasn't like you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody said anything.
Mhm.
And then then everybody started to talk, French, and they agreed with me. I was right. She's
Mhm.
right, they said. So then somebody got up and went over to look for Rennie. And he got upstairs to bed.
Yeah.
So we quit and we had lunch and they came back.
Yeah. Quite a time.
Yeah.
Quite a time. So much of your work has been in the recreational leisure field. As a social worker, how do those things fit together for you?
Well, I'm a social group worker.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. Social work is social group work. Social case work, medical social work, and leisure social work.
Mm-hmm. You're one of the few, if not the only person that I've talked to who has had this kind of experience.
Oh, I
So
see.
it's new to me.
I see. Well, Alan Klein was in Toronto. Did you know Alan Klein? He was with, the Hedley Demick was there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You knew Hedley Demick.
I knew it. No,
You know,
yeah.
So Alan Klein and I kind of thought the same way. So we corresponded a lot, and he used to come down. Once or twice we had him down to sort of pep us up. The last time I had him here was, well, we had a big conference, a big recreation conference in Montreal, and I ran a workshop in it, a social work workshop, because it was a recreation conference, you know. So we ran this, and Claude Ryan, do you know Claude Ryan? He was the editor of Le Devoir. He came and gave the opening remarks, and he did a very fine job. And then Alan gave a kickoff speech, and then we had groups, and then he came back and he summarized it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a real old timer. Saul Bernstein, the New York, the Boston School. I don't know who was at the New York School when we went and took that session. Oh, a nice man, very, very nice. Not Carol, no. Well, there's lots of social group workers. There's a dime a dozen all over the place. You have them in Toronto, you have them in Ottawa, haven't you?
I imagine we do. One of the disadvantages of working at the national level on policy is that
you don't get to see them.
I'm not much
The Canadian
connected with
Welfare
those.
Council had them, had one. It had because we had fun then. I was chairman of a committee. This is going back into history. I was chairman of a committee in the Canadian Welfare Council. When I went off to study, before I went away, Dick Davis asked me if I would come and work for the council, Canadian Council. And I said, well, I'm going off just to do this study. Well, he said, when you come back, will you think about it? I said, yes, sure. So Ernie McEwen, that was it, was working there at the time. And we were trying to do the thing that you're asking me now, interpret to the welfare field the whole concept of man and his leisure and the importance of this in the development of the human being. So, we held this session, a very special session at one of the Canadian conferences that was being held in, I think it was being held in Ottawa. Ottawa, right? And that was the first time we really plugged. I had to chair the meeting, but we were happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
That was before I went to Boston, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. It's hard for social workers to sort of. But this is the way you really find out who people are. And I want to go back a little bit, and you find out. I want to go back a little bit to what I was talking about when I went to the university, something with those group of children. Do you remember that? Well, there were only 3 little girls that were bothersome. They were disruptive to groups. Otherwise, the group was fine. And after about the second or third session, I thought, well, no, that's it. I'm going to ask them to stay after the club and talk to them. So I asked them if they would please stay, and so they stayed. And one was tall, one was fat, and one was tiny. So I guess there were 3 little, now when I think back, there were 3 little misfits probably. So I kind of looked down at these little girls and I said, everybody seems to like this group. Everybody's having fun and we're playing. And then these little faces were looking up at me like this, and I thought, I'm talking down to these kids. You know, it doesn't make sense. What would I feel like? Why are we down there and somebody's talking to me like that? You know. So I knelt down, squatted, one leg up, and then I was looking up at them. So, and I said, so then I started talking. I said, you know, this is your group, and I want you to have fun here, and I want you to come, but I don't want you to spoil the fun for the rest of the children here. So I said, I think we have no choice but to make a decision. You can come, and I'm glad to have you, but you don't disturb the class. And if you feel that that's the way you want to have fun, well, then you're going to have to go and have it somewhere else, because that is not really fun. So you think about that. If you still want to come back next week, come. We'd be delighted to have you. We'd like to have you. But if you feel that you don't want to have fun the way we're having fun here, then you better think about that too. What Katie said. So then they left, and that was fine. They came back. We had no more trouble with them at all. But I was the one that got insight in that. You know, I got a lot of knowledge of who people are, and how to communicate with them. I really learned how to communicate. That was the first thing I really understood. You know, you can't tell people, because I was thinking of this. I was in high school. I was swimming representative for my class, and to try to encourage everybody to go swimming. The instructor ran a competition in the classes. You got marks for all kinds of things, like even just stepping into the pool, you get a mark. You know, diving in head first, you got everything. So I was trying to get everybody to go down and do anything. I didn't care. So this very good friend of mine, I got her down the pool. She didn't like to swim. I don't think she could swim. Probably got to do a little dog paddle or something. But I said, now look, the only thing you have to do is just roll up. Don't take any breath. Hold your nose if you want. And just let yourself fall into the edge of the pool. That's all. I said, you'll come right up and I'll grab you. And we get 2 marks. Well, you know, I must have been 10 minutes trying to convince her that. And she did it. I'd never seen anybody so frightened when she came up. She was really scared. I felt I had no right to have her do that. Because she never did it again. She just did it because I asked her. That was another time when you really get, you know, you think about, you know, who you are and what it's all about.
Yeah, and in the recreation and leisure field, I suppose that you're often seeing people, perhaps not at their best, but at least not at their worst, as is the situation with some of the jobs that some social workers have, where people are
always in great trouble.
Yeah. You might have an opportunity to work with people on a much more productive, or from a much more productive beginning.
Because they use you. People, when I think back of how people came to me, you know, for advice, for help, for recommendations, for all kinds of things, and how because of my training, I was able to really help them in a more way than just quote a recreation person would have been able to help them. And even today, you know, I'm always surprised at the people who come and ask for help, you know, start telling me problems that they have. I have to be careful, because I could get loaded. So it's, and that's just, you know, in friendships, like your friends or people that work for you or things like that. But I don't know, to go back to what you're saying, I suppose that's true. People come for leisure to find some joy in life, to find some release. But the potentials of this are so great. Because in a group you have to learn who you are, how you function in that group, how the other people react to you in that group, how you can be a good member of that group, how you can destroy the group completely. And when you're a leader of a group, you're going through this all the time. And when you take, like, you have a little group, a little play group or something, that's fine, but when you get into community organization, you have to know who people are, what they're trying to do, what their motives are, how destructive are they, how positive are they, what's the core of that person? Do they have the qualities for leadership? What kind of leadership do they give? How do you stop them from taking leadership because they're so destructive? But how they can get people to follow them? How do you get that group to work together and not start quarreling like they did with Rennie Malil? So you have 5 groups instead of 1. So community organization is a very, very difficult. I think it's the most difficult thing to do in the field of social work, I would think. Because there's so many facets, because you're dealing with people who are nuts, if you want to use that term, you know. You're dealing with people who have lots of problems themselves, and they use this group for purposes of their own needs. Well, the needs of that group is to get the job done that they're there for.
And yet the individual's needs often
come to the fore and take over, and that they can destroy the group because of that, because that's their need. They like to create havoc, or they want to be the leader and they don't have the qualities, or they want to dominate the conversation all the time. So it's really tricky, really, really tricky. You have to understand, how do you get that person to stop from talking? You know, what do you do? Outside the group, inside the group? What do you do?
Sure.
So if you're really a good community organizer, you have to be able to get a person like that into your office and do some casework if you want to, you know, because that's true. Because you have to help them to see what they're doing. You have to help them to stop and think before they talk. You have to make them, I remember once in NDG, we had 2 women that were absolutely impossible. They were going to really destroy the whole council now. They wanted to be, one wanted to be chairman and the other wanted to be the secretary. And, you know, and they always had they were always talking, and they wanted their ideas to hold forth. And the rest of the committee were, there's a big committee, and they were just for throwing them out. Oh, I said, well, you can't do that, because if you throw them out, you've got to split your group outside, and it's going to even be worse. Well, what are we going to do, they said. I said, I don't know. Well, they said, we've got to do something. Well, I said, do you want me to try something? They said, will you? I said, yes, I'll try something. But now, in the group, don't attack them. Try to be positive. Try to see something good in some of the things they say. Try to turn their words around. So what they said now comes out as a more meaningful kind of thing in relationship to the group. And they'll take that from you, because the group will approve of it. Okay, they said. And then so then I started to work very closely with these people. I called them up. I asked for their opinions. I got them close to me. I made them feel that I was concerned about them. And, you know, we really got through. We never broke that group. And it would have been more if we had. We would have never got on with the job we had to do. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I can certainly see the can't think of the right word. Anyway, the potential, I guess is the word I'm looking for, of combining social work and recreation and leisure, for getting a lot of improvements made in a community, and for helping individuals as well.
Well, when you're a community organizer, my specialty was leisure, but I used the group work and the community organization and the casework skills.
Sure.
And you would even use some of the skills of a medical social worker, because you knew that people had medical problems. And you weren't out there to help them to cure them, but you were out there to recognize they had to be handled in a group. It might be a psychiatric problem, it might be a heart condition, it might be emotional problems, people who can't stop talking, you know, or whatever it is.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it gives you a wonderful round picture of the total.
Yeah, right. Maybe we could move from there into some more general questions. Although we haven't talked about your time at either Ville Marie or New Horizons, were there things about those experiences that were different from what you had done before?
Well, briefly, with Ville Marie's social service, I went in to do a study of the needs of the aged. We had trouble implementing that. We really never got it implemented. However, they did use part of that study to do the program. And so that was the job that I did there. I also acted as a consultant in relationship to services for older people. I think that was about that. The thing I did too, I applied. We want to get some money for 3 residences: the Griffith-McConnell, St. Margaret's, and the one on one of the other homes. And we got them. I got them together, and we applied for a grant for the 3 of them. And we got about $55,000 for a recreation program. And then I stayed with the grant and to put it in operation. And we got volunteers, and each resident set up their own committees and worked up their own programs and handled their own money, and it was really quite fascinating. And we got I put when one girl had been a student of mine, and we got a couple of other people that went in because we had enough money to pay them. We paid them part-time, and so the whole tone of these organizations changed, and the quality of the programming was just wonderful, fascinating. So that was a nice thing I did. We were able to get that grant. So that was how I kind of got a taste of New Horizons, and I met a couple of staff members, and we liked each other. And then I went in there one day to do something or other, and the director asked me if I'd like to come and work for New Horizons. So I was just winding up with, and I was 65 then, so I was ready to retire as far as the government was concerned. So I said yes. So he said, well, we want somebody to open up the whole area in Eastern Townships and get the English-speaking people to use it more, because he said they don't use it nearly enough. I said, would you like to do that? I said, I'd love to do that. Does that mean, can I work, do I have to work out of the Montreal office? Do I have to be in Montreal? He said, no, you don't have to be in Montreal. So then I moved down here.
Oh, Dunham is in Eastern Township.
Yes, I was going to cover the whole Eastern Township. Yeah,
Right.
this is Eastern Township.
Right.
So then I moved down, and I traveled all back and forth, and got people to ask for grants, and got all the little cemeteries here that had to be reclaimed. All the older people wanted to get money to put up fences and to repair stones, and I got money for all that. And then I worked with the Missisquoi Museum, and they got a fantastic grant to do their archives.
Mm-hmm.
So that was wonderful. So, but then after the summer was over, he called me back into town because by January the requests are coming in. They all have, there's a lot of paperwork to move around, and they need people to write up. You have to write up all these assignments.
Mm-hmm.
So he called me in, and then I worked in the office, and I found that very hard because I was living down here. I stayed with a friend who was working with New Horizons,
Mm-hmm.
which was nice in her apartment, but I found it hectic. So that summer I decided I had it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was getting myself too tired.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we could move to some concluding questions then. After a long career in the field of social work, leisure, and recreation, which I still find a fascinating combination, I wonder if there are other accomplishments besides
Social group work it is, you know?
Social,
It's social group work.
social group work.
And they use all these facets, just like you use a hospital or you use a, you know, in casework, I don't know what you use, but
Uh-huh.
you use a medium in which to work.
Yeah.
And we use leisure in which to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. You're helping me understand the whole concept much more thoroughly than I did before. As you think back over the years, I wonder if there are accomplishments of which you're particularly proud, or things that you're pleased that you've done over the years.
Well, I'm very pleased I was able to save the files for the Montreal Parks and Playgrounds Association. That's incidental, but that's close to my heart. Yes, let me see. Well, I'm very thrilled with the program we did for the aged, because that was we really got things going there. I'm very pleased with the program we did with the public recreation directors, because that really, those men are still friends of mine. Dick Cattell. Well, Dick Cattell served on the provincial committee that they set up for leisure.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the members. He represented the English-speaking section, and then Alice Johansson. You know, she's with, no, you don't know McGill, of course. She was with the McGill. Well, you know Jack Rabbit Johansson?
Mm-hmm.
Well, his daughter.
Oh, mm-hmm.
She's out at the estate here. They run Arboretum, and they have about 1,000 acres of land there. They run all kinds of programs, nature and hikes and things. When Dick left, we got her on Quebec. So the inroads that we were able to make in the French community,
Mm-hmm.
that pleased me, because I had, from the beginning stages of the Parks and Playgrounds, I'd always worked with the French.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pleased that we were able to do that. The thing that makes me very unhappy now is that all this is being destroyed because the present government has no Department of Recreation, nothing at all. So all that is gone, and there's pockets of this nice relationship, of course, between the French and English, because all public recreation programs are geared for everybody. But perhaps I myself feel the lack of that because I'm not part of it anymore. Might be that. But I was very pleased that we were able to do that, and we were able to get a lot of our concepts, recreation for the handicapped, and old age, and camping, and playgrounds into the French community, our concepts, and have them, using them and changing them and fitting them to their needs. I find this very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you keep seeing bits of things at your work, you know, appearing in a foreign atmosphere, which is nice. It's like, now what else? Well, I enjoyed my teaching. I taught at St. George. I set up a social welfare course there and taught it for quite a few years. That I enjoyed. the piece of work we did in NDG, I think that was just a perfect piece of work. Everybody was very, very happy with that. The thing that I feel very happy about was that I had the opportunity to work with Captain Bowie. I learned a great deal from him. I learned more about community organization from him than I realized until I took the course, but I realized that I was practicing. And the privilege of working with Gwyneth Howell. She was a very, very special person. And had all the things that I'm saying to you, I learned from her, how to work with people, how to get things done, how to keep quiet and do the job, and not worry about whether you're getting credit for it or whether you're in the front line, because if the job is done, that's your credit, and that's your front line. So that was, to me, those were two very good privileges. I appreciate them very much.
There's just a concluding question that I'd like to ask, probably because of what's happening in other parts of the country at the time, right now. Two of the things, or at least two of the things that you've been, that you had long associations with, lots of experience, and it sounds like lots of personal investment in, have gone by the boards, the Montreal Council of Social Agencies, and government investment or involvement in recreation services. That kind of thing is happening in many parts of the country now, where people who work long and hard for things see them evaporate. How do you keep going when things like that happen?
Of course, that's life, isn't it? You see, it's like there are people that still carry on. The council isn't there, but the things that they learned. For instance, I was thinking of the public recreation directors, for one, because that represents masses of services to masses of people. Well, Dick Cattell, I see him quite a lot. He runs a beautiful show. He came out of high school and married. He didn't go to university. He has had no additional education except high school education. He says to me, everything I know I learned from you. He doesn't say that so much now, but that's what he used to. He said, I learned how to write letters, I learned how to prepare reports, I learned how to do this, I learned how to do that. He runs a beautiful, beautiful program. Well, what more can you ask for? And you can get that right across the province, because the recreation departments of the cities and towns are good. They're not as good perhaps in some as in others. But certainly in the metropolitan area, we have to. Eric Sharp is at St. Lambert's, he's still there. City of Montreal, I don't really know. Rennie Bellil isn't, because he's retired quite a while ago, because he was about my age. But the City of Montreal has a fairly good program, I would say. They do quite a lot of interesting things. All the little cities and towns around do. Dick's out of Doorbell. I think you see this, it's like planting a seed, isn't it? And sometimes it goes underground, but as soon as the sun shines and water gets down there and the conditions are right, it grows again. Don't you think so? So I don't worry about that. I look at all the reports we did, and I look at the old age. Look what we did for old age people, and look where they are today. Now we say it's still terrible, but my gosh, in comparison to where it was 25 or 30 years ago, we really pull the roots up, and everybody knows about older people. They know that they're clever. Look at that little publication, Senior Scene. Did you ever get it? No, you wouldn't get it. But that was a New Horizon grant. This group, and I keep meeting people, you see, that I knew, like the youth group that we had at the Rosemount Community Centre. Now, those were poverty years. When I was working at St. Margaret's Home with that grant that we got from the federal government, the New Horizon grant, one day when I went in, the director of the resident came up to me and she said, there's somebody down in our kitchen that wants to talk to you. I said, oh, what have I done? You haven't done anything, it's a surprise. Now, will you just wait here, I'm going to get her. I said, sure. So she went down, and here I saw this young woman, well, she was about 35 again, running towards me, and it was Madeleine Searle. Now Madeline Cyril, she heard that I was there and she wanted to see me.
Mm-hmm.
Madeline Cyril was a little girl I had on playgrounds. She was about she was about 9 or 10. She came up to playgrounds with 4 little brothers and sisters. She had to mind them. My sister was teaching in a school in that area, and she had one of the boys in her class, and he was terrible, terrible, terrible. And in desperation, she had 40 children, and in desperation, she called Donald Watson, who was the principal, to come. And he came, and he picked up this little boy, and he put him in his car, and he drove him home. And when he got home, this is giving you background of this little girl. When he got home, he picked him up and he took him in, and his father was there. And the father had been in the army, and he had all these kids. And when he saw that this little boy, Richard I think his name was, had misbehaved, he picked him up by the scruff of the neck and he lay into him. You know, you wonder how the child would survive. Poor Donald grabbed the child back, put him in his car, and drove him back to school, you know. But the Madeline, the little girl that I saw, she came up and she had all these little kids, so she was athletic, and she wanted to play softball, and she wanted to, so I would get them in the sandbox, and get a couple of other kids around, or we always had little kids who wanted to be leaders, you know, so you gather them around, and so Madeline could go off and have her softball or whatever she wanted to do. Now, she grew up, and then she was around the community center when I was there too, so I would have seen her there as a young teenager. But she never forgotten me. Mm-hmm. She never forgotten me. And she put her arms around me as if, you know, and to me it was, I hadn't, you know, it was a very minor little thing that she, but that, don't you think that those are things? And she said to me, she said, you know what? She said, I played on a women's league. My father went with me to all the games. He coached me. You know, look at the effect that would have for this man who couldn't get a job and, you know, was crazy with all these kids. And here his daughter was, you know, a champion. She played on the well-known girls team. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So it was kind of a nice story.
Sure.
So you get that. Then the other thing is this little senior scene I was telling you about. A group came, when I was at New Horizons, a group came to get some money to write a newspaper, to publish a newspaper for the seniors. And the Protestant School Board had a community organizer working with them in adult education. Mm-hmm. And these older people had gone to take a course in adult education. And they said they wanted to learn how to write. They wanted to do some creative writing. So when the course was over, they said now they wanted to publish a newspaper. So he was a smart guy. He said, well, let's go to New Horizons. So he brought them into New Horizons. So I wrote up the project for them, and I had a hard time because the French had come in and asked for a grant for about a year before that. Mm-hmm. And they'd gotten a lot of money, and they had got a commercial firm to publish it. Mm-hmm. And there was all kinds of terrible publicity in it, you know, stuff that you wouldn't put in it. And it had been $30,000 they'd lost. So I thought, oh, you know, and then this was going on when I was there. When this request came in, I thought, oh, I wonder, you know, this one bad experience, whether they were going to get the money. So we warned them, and I wrote it up, and I really worked hard, and they got their money for typewriters, for everything. And they struggled, and this has been going. I'll give you the little last issue. I went to their annual meeting. That's the third meeting. They publish about six issues a year, and it's improving. Now they're raising money themselves. They're in a campaign. They've got the Gazette that's helping them with publishing it. Mm-hmm. They distribute it at centres. Like they take a whole bundle and leave it at a recreation centre or in an old age place. They send me a bundle and I distribute it down here. But it's fantastic what they've done. So, no, you know. Now the interesting thing is one of the women in this group was one of the girls in the senior group that I had back, Lily and Curtis Frost now. And these very, very nice. And they had gone through poverty. You know, the depression was awful. What it did to all of us, it was a terrible thing. But she had married, and they had 3 little sons, and her children are now, their husband's dead. But when I went in the annual meeting, I heard that she met with a very serious accident. She fell or something, and she's badly shattered.
Oh, that's a shame.
So I must really try to find out where she is, and perhaps she might come down and stay with me a week or so this summer just to get her.
Well, I wonder if in conclusion.
But those are things I think bring you satisfaction.
Yeah, and keep you going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this woman, she always wanted to write, so she's writing for this little newspaper.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add as we end our interview?
Now, let me see. Yes, I'd like to say how delighted I am that you're doing this. Alice Taylor Davies who taught the McGill School of Social Work. It was an American. Went back home and married. I forget what the husband's first name. Anyhow, she married another social worker, and they were quite prominent in the field of welfare in Washington. Her husband has a place here at Magog, which is just beyond the Spearville Lake here, and she comes down every summer, so I see quite a lot of her. And she's a very bright and very intelligent. She's 83 years old. And what they do, the National Association of Social Work are doing, they're asking their elderly social workers to write the history of their social work. Because they say this way we will get the history of the social work in the United States. So she did that. It must be published, because she's worked on it for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she did a lot of taping, so when she comes up, she's going to bring a copy this summer. So I just thought that might be an interesting thing for us to know. And I thought, well, now if she's done that, why don't I just write the story of my own life in the social work field? So now we've got a little bit of it in here. And I feel that social group work never really seemed to be understood by the community. And that I think, except for instance, in the Jewish community, they understand what this is all about, and they have top workers. But certainly in our English-speaking community, it wasn't recognized here in Montreal. Though we did encourage, and we got a $5,000 grant, and we brought Anne Zalawa on to set up a social group work, what's the word I'm looking for, social group work. Anyhow. Pardon?
Similar?
No, not a seminar. She came and taught. She was here for 3 or 4 years.
Oh,
In the School of Social Work. So we were then able to train our social workers, Pat Morris and quite a few others. So that was another thing I was very happy that we were able to do in the council, because we got the first money to pay for her salary.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you very much.
There's so many things that we did, you know.
Yeah, so much.
Yeah, so much it all gets jumbled too, when you haven't been at it for a period of time. But I'm going to get myself. I have a den back here, which is a very nice room. I had the door closed because I've been sorting. I've got all family papers and all this stuff, and I'm unpacking boxes and sorting. And I've got a lot of this stuff. And then all the ALQ stuff is out at Dorval, because Dick Cattell put it up for us. And I've been going up there to sort that, because it's a